I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: is it morally acceptable to hunt animals? Now, the reason I'm asking this question, and I'm going to the viewer mailbag a day earlier than I'd planned to because of this, is because yesterday when I posted my Daily Question video, I mentioned that I'd been hunting on Monday, and a couple of people raised questions with me about the morality of hunting, and they said they'd love to hear my thoughts on it. So I thought, what a great way to start, and what a great place to open the viewer mailbag by exploring this issue. This is an area where I think it's really important to have a good, sound moral philosophy which underpins your view of the world and obviously your actions in the world. And one of the things that's really important about good moral philosophy is the ability to make important metaphysical distinctions. So the first big distinction we make is that an animal is different from a human person, and it's all in the name, person. A person is a personal moral subject. They are capable of two really important things. Number one, they are capable of moral reasoning. They don't just think, they think about thinking, and they can think about or engage in the process of reasoning about morality and moral action. Number two capacity that a person has is free will, the ability to actually choose which course of moral action they will embark upon. That they can actually think about morality and think about right and wrong, and then they can make a choice for themselves about which path they are going to embark upon. An animal doesn't do this. They are different. An animal doesn't think about thinking. It doesn't have the capacity to think about thinking. It doesn't have that same free will or that same rational intellect. This is what we might call a self-evident truth. It's just so obvious because of the world around us. We see this all the time. And this is precisely why we don't put dogs on trial in a courtroom when they attack human beings or they attack other animals, because we recognize that when a dog attacks someone in the street, they didn't engage in a process of moral reasoning, and they weren't choosing to do that action. They were driven purely by urge. But we recognize that if a human person attacked someone in the street, that they are capable of moral reasoning, and that they are more than just an urge-driven creature. They have the capacity to transcend their urges, to rise above their urges, and choose to do the good, even when they might be tempted to do the exact opposite. So therefore, they can be held accountable for their actions. So that's the first and important metaphysical distinction we make. An animal is not the same type of thing as a personal moral subject. And so we would say that a personal moral subject has an inherent dignity and a set of rights that are inherent to it, that are intrinsic to it by virtue of its nature. It's a human person. It has those rights by virtue of its nature. However, an animal is not one of those same types of things. An animal is not a personal moral subject, so it doesn't have any rights. And this is why I don't like using the term animal rights. I know some people do use this term, but I don't like using it. I think the correct term to use is animal welfare. And why I like the term animal welfare is because it puts the onus, the moral responsibility, in the right place. Animal welfare is about us as human persons and how we treat, interact with, how we act around animals. And the onus is on us because we're the moral subjects capable of doing moral or immoral things. And so therefore, when we talk about animal welfare, we're talking about how we provide for or neglect the well-being of animals. This is where the metaphysical distinctions around animals become a little bit more nuanced as well. So, for example, even though we would say in theory it's permissible to hunt an animal, where it wouldn't be permissible to hunt a human person because they have, for example, the right to life, and it's never acceptable to deliberately deprive an innocent human person of their right to life, whereas an animal doesn't have that right, and that's a different story. That doesn't mean that it would be morally permissible to hunt every kind of animal. We make important distinctions. Again, another metaphysical distinction, a very common one we make is, well, how rare is a particular type of animal? It would be immoral to hunt in such a way that you would destroy an entire species. It would be immoral to hunt species of animals that are endangered species. There's a metaphysical distinction that we're making there, as opposed to some sort of species of animals that is just prolific. The other type of metaphysical distinction we would make when we talk about hunting animals is this idea that certain types of hunting are not acceptable. It wouldn't be acceptable to torture an animal or to use some cruel and unusual method for hunting the animal, because an animal is still capable of feeling pain. And it would lack humanity on our part, I believe. In fact, it lacks such humanity that we are well aware, and have been for many years now, many decades now, that how a child or a person treats animals can be an indicator of whether or not they might have other serious underlying psychological issues that we need to be aware of. They might lack basic human empathy, right? And because of their inability to recognize that you shouldn't actually deliberately and willfully, for your own gratuity and for your own self-gratification, get off on causing pain to another entity or another creature that is capable of being in pain, right? So we understand that it would be wrong to use certain hunting methods. You know, let's say we're talking about hunting deer, which is what I was doing on Monday, shooting a deer in the hindquarters and then deliberately chasing it around with spears, because we get off on the idea of spearing a deer to death in that way, and we enjoy the suffering we cause. That would be an immoral thing to do. It's also important to grasp some other essential distinctions here as well. So when you talk about hunting animals here in New Zealand, you're talking about things like, for example, I hunt rabbits. I hunt hares, possums, deer. These are all animals that are prolific and they are pests. And a lot of people don't realise that can be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So in Australia, for example, possums are a protected species. In New Zealand, they are a pest. They are a nuisance, and so they're not a protected species. Rabbits are prolific and a real problem in New Zealand. Deer in New Zealand have no natural predators. The only predator that can prohibit a deer population from getting out of control are hunters like me. People like myself and my other fellow Kiwis who go deer hunting are actually doing an important service, and we are keeping the deer population in check in this country. The deer are actually pests in our native forest, and what happens is if the deer population gets out of control, they do a lot of damage to the native plants and the native foliage and other things that grow in our forest. And so it's not just about the fact that we're going out and hunting a particular animal. We're actually doing something important for the ecosystem, the environment here in New Zealand when we do that. Now, some people would like to say, well, won't the ecosystem take care of itself? Well, no. There's two different ways in which human beings can interact with the environment. One would be in a destructive way. So we set up factories and we pollute rivers and waterways and we do untold damage to the environment. That's obviously a bad thing. The other type of intervention is where we intervene in a positive way and human beings actually assist an ecosystem to really flourish and to thrive. And what the research shows us is that in an ecosystem where you have human intervention that is positive and well thought out, like for example culling back a deer population, that kind of human intervention is better for an ecosystem than leaving an ecosystem by itself. Nature will not just automatically sort itself out. That's a myth. And so this human intervention, which is good, positive and targeted in the right ways, actually results in a better ecosystem. Last point to make is this, that when we go deer hunting here in New Zealand, the general norm is that people actually eat the meat. It's not the thrill of killing that leads us to actually hunt and stalk deer. It's much more complex than that, because if you've ever been deer stalking, you'll know that quite often it's a process where, like we did on Monday, you will spend effectively 8 hours tramping through some beautiful pristine bush, but you spend 8 hours tramping and tracking and deer stalking with rifles over your shoulder. It's like tramping with guns. It's not wandering through the bush and shooting everything that moves. And if a hunter goes into the bush and half an hour later they come across a deer and they take the shot and they kill the deer and they take the meat, etc., they don't then carry on killing lots more deer. The normal thing that would happen is that the hunters would leave the bush at that point. So it is a very sort of focused and targeted kind of thing. It doesn't involve torture. It doesn't involve the sort of indiscriminate mass killing of animals. So hopefully that answers the questions that people were raising about that issue. And as per usual, the floor is now open. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.